Hi everybody, good afternoon and welcome to the information session for the Teen Writing Bootcamps. My name is Catalina Cox and I will be moderating the panel today. So today is just an info session, so the authors are going to let you guys know what is coming up in their workshops. So feel free to ask any questions in the comments and we'll get to a Q&A session at the end. So before I start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land we're all on today. On behalf of State Library Victoria, I'd like to acknowledge the Wurundjeri Woi-wurrung people, the traditional owners of the land of the State Library. I also recognise the Anawan people, who are the owners of the land I am on today. I'd also like to acknowledge the traditional lands of all the Victorian Aboriginal clans and their cultural practices and knowledge systems. We recognise that the State Collection holds traditional cultural knowledge belonging to Indigenous communities in Victoria and around the country. We support communities to protect the integrity of this information gathered from their ancestors in the colonial period. We pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging, who have handed down these systems of practice to each new generation for millennia. So this promo has been made possible with the generosity of Sir Pills Foundation and the JTM Foundation. So now I'd like to introduce our two authors for this panel, Nouveau Zissin and Emily Gale.
Hello.
So Emily Gale is an expert in all things book, having worked in the book industry for over 20 years in various roles, including editor, book buyer, and author. Her work includes the junior fiction Eliza Boom, middle grade novels The Other Side of Summer and Elsewhere Girls, which was co-written with Nova Wheatman, and the YA novels Girl, Aloud, Still My Sunshine, and I Am Out with Lanterns. So Emily will be conducting workshops on contemporary fiction. And Nouveau Zissin, who goes by they, them pronouns, is a queer, non-binary, Jewish author, performer, and activist based in Melbourne. They run workshops in schools and workplaces around transgender and queer identities. Nouveau is the author of the acclaimed memoir Finding Nouveau, which explores their journey with gender. They have also written The Pronoun Lowdown and has been author in Kindred, a collection of queer Australian YA stories. Nouveau is the perfect person to run the Own Voices writing workshops. So we'll move straight into our first question. So to both of you, why is contemporary fiction or Own Voices writing a good means for you to express yourself? So Emily, you first.
Well, you can say and do anything in fiction. So it's a really safe place, I think. And certainly while you're writing it, just before you start sharing it, it's probably the safest way you can express yourself. After you've shared it, it can get a little bit scary because then you've got other people's judgment. But I can give you some good ways to deal with that judgment as well. I think it's also just such an amazing feeling to create something out of nothing. You start with a blank page and you sort of look at it and think, how can I make my mark on this? But you can, and what I really want to show you how to do in my workshop is to harness all those amazing ideas that are inside you, but which maybe you're not quite sure how to get from start to finish. I really want to help you to do that whole process.
Perfect. And Nouveau, why do you think Own Voices writing is a good means for you to express yourself?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I think because as like a queer and trans young person, I just didn't see myself represented anywhere. I used to create like these fractured pieces of glass from every novel I read or every film I watched and tried to create a mirror in order to see myself. And I just always saw the gaps between the glass. Like I just never actually felt like my future or who I wanted to be or my family or my friends were ever really represented anywhere. And so I think the beautiful thing about Own Voices writing is that as queer people who have been historically erased from so many forms of representation, we get to write ourselves back into existence. And I don't think that that's just the case for queer people. I think it's also for people of any minority group across any axis of oppression, but also really for everyone to access their own voice and find what their story sounds like through their own language and through their own words. And so for me, it felt like I was writing myself back into existence.
Yeah, so Navo, why do you think it's important for teens to write about their own voices?
I think it's important because I think that unfortunately we still live in a world that tries to take teen voices away from teens. You know, I think that we live in a society that says like children are the future, which I really hate because I think that you're the right now. Like your voice doesn't become valid just when you reach a certain age or a certain amount of experience. I think the most intense emotions, some of the most formative experiences I had in my life happened when I was a teenager. So I think there's something really beautiful in learning to find that authorial voice or that writing voice at a young age and be able to tell your story and find the ways that your story is important and it matters. And yeah, I think that it's a really beautiful time to do that as early as you possibly can. I mean, I started writing my memoir when I was 19, and I certainly never thought that it would be published, but you really just have no idea where that can take you.
Yeah, wow. So for Emily, what is contemporary fiction? Going back to basics, what is and why do you write it?
Well, if you know bookie people, you'll know that two bookie people could probably argue about this for a really, really long time. Actually, I read one definition of contemporary fiction is, oh, it's anything set after World War II. And I sort of thought that was probably a definition someone came up with in about 1970, which if you're born in 2004 or 2005 is probably not really that relevant anymore. But for the purposes of this workshop, it just means stories that portray the here and now in a realistic way. So fundamentally no talking dragons, I guess. But I am a person who really believes in following your gut in a story. So if you start writing a story that is about you and your friend who kidnap your English teacher's cocker spaniel and hide out in an abandoned country town, and you can somehow convince me that a talking dragon is exactly what the story needs, I'm open to that. So yeah, open to things, but we're really talking about portraying the here and now, the issues that are really important to you and how we can write about those in fiction. Yeah.
So do you think contemporary fiction sort of like reflects society, or like do you think that could be a lens for that?
Yeah, it definitely, well, it does. It does reflect society. And of course, that is why it is so important to have as many different voices as possible, young voices and all kinds of voices. Yeah, I mean, it's a way of, you know, reading contemporary fiction is a way of experiencing another life temporarily. I'm very greedy. I really want to experience as many lives as possible, and that's why I read. And I guess being a writer is then just, you know, the next step after that is how can I try and recreate these experiences that I've had as a reader for somebody else?
Yeah. So for both of you, what will the teens who sign up for the workshop get out of the workshop? What will they learn? Navo.
Yeah, so my workshops span quite a range of different things. So I have it broken up into a few different sections. The first workshop is about accessing your story and finding your own voice and building confidence. The next one is about writing for self-love, so how to cultivate self-care and compassion for yourself through writing. I think that a lot of writing courses don't actually talk about the mental health implications of writing, especially when you're writing your own story. You know, when I was writing my memoir, like, it was pretty traumatizing going back through all those memories that I didn't necessarily want to remember. So conversations about how can we use writing for self-love and also how can we care for ourselves through writing. Then I've got one on working through obstacles, specifically around imposter syndrome and perfectionism. I run that workshop mostly as a reminder to myself because I forget to remember those things often. And then the final workshop is on the ethics of memoir and what are some of the considerations that we need to have when we are writing our own story and when we are writing about other people as well. So it's kind of a broad range, but lots of fun, lots of writing activities and lots of information.
And Emily, what will teens get out of your workshop?
First of all, can I say I want to come to Navo's workshop? That sounds amazing. Yeah. That sounds so good. I I'm an editor as well, as you said at the start, Catalina, and a lot of the time I work with people who have amazing ideas, but they need help putting it into the whole package. And so I really want, in the course of the bootcamp, I want people to actually come away with a thing. You know, like when you go to a pottery class, you come away with a pot. I want you to come away with a story. And so so it is going to be like right from the start, we're going to go, right, what's the theme? What's the area of interest? What's the main character? By the first workshop, you are going to have your first line. You're going to have your first line. And then in the second workshop, we're going to look at how setting is not just we're in a room. Setting is mood and context and everything. We're going to look at how we can put mood into our writing. We are going to look at creating amazing dialogue and the importance of detail, what to put in, what to leave out. Being an editor, I'm very big on what to leave out. And then in week 4, I want to talk about resolutions and endings. And I really want you to come away with either a piece or you're just about to write this piece and it's going to be amazing.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Everyone should sign up. So, Nevo, how has writing about your experience helped you or others?
I think writing about my experience has helped me make sense of it in my own language. Like, I think especially one of the reasons why I wanted to write a book was because as a trans young person, I did like quite a few interviews for newspapers or on the ABC or whatever. And the kind of language that was used was just really not how I felt about my own story. So a lot of sensationalized media language of, you know, born in the wrong body or became like, was a girl, became a boy, or my mum and I did one once that was called losing a daughter, gaining a son. And it just felt really gross to me because I was like, that's not how I connect to my story. And I never really see, like every trans article or movie I watch, like it's not for me. It's not designed for me. It's designed for non-trans people to try and understand our lived experience. And I guess I wanted to write something that was for us, you know, and that was written in the way that I actually felt about my journey, not born in the wrong body, but born in the wrong world or with lots of expectations that weren't supposed to be put on me in that kind of way. So I think for me, it was like really cathartic to write that and to be able to own my own narrative. And it was also really painful, you know, remembering all those things, having conversations with my family, being like, you guys weren't always really great and I'm going to write about that. And they were like, well, don't, you know, or that never happened was a thing that some people wrote, some people said. So, yeah, it was complicated, but I think, you know, I've had a lot of people say that like it was the first time they've ever felt themselves represented, or, you know, it's made them feel like they can make it to adulthood even to see what it means to be like a happy trans adult who has people who love them and community and family and all of that. So yeah, I think you can't really underestimate the impact that representation can have and that writing your own story can have.
Yeah. So for both of you guys, so why were you interested in writing as a career? Like what were the influences that helped you get started? Emily, you go first.
My origin story is really boring. I mean, I just grew up in a really booky house. I was allowed to read anything. No one ever told me, no, you can't read that, or, you know, that's not suitable. I was an extremely shy child, and I still think of myself as a very shy adult. So I think I'm always at my most comfortable when I have my nose in a book. I hide behind books a lot. But when I was a child, even though I had that thought, I want to be a writer, that's the thing I really, really want to be. I didn't think that was realistic at all. I sort of thought that authors were sort of a bit special and magical. I thought it was sort of like saying I want to be a wizard. So I thought, well, the next best thing is to just be near books as often as possible. So when I left university, I became an editor of children's books. And once I'd done that for a few years, I realized that authors were quite normal, not super normal, but quite normal. Normal enough that I could, make my way to be an author myself. But I actually started out with books I started out with baby books, and I know babies don't read, but that's where I started, with really, really basic stuff. But it was a start, and to now where whole novels, my God, but you got to start somewhere. I started with baby books.
I love that. I'm going to baby books now. I really want to write children's books. That's really exciting to me. Yeah, it's a good question, because I didn't really know what I wanted to do or be. I still don't always know what I want to do or be. I think it's funny that you have this expectation in high school to want to know, that you're supposed to know what to do with your entire future. And for me, it just kind of happened. I wasn't really planning on it. I always loved writing, and I loved studying English at school, and I loved English literature, and I really loved reading. But school reading kind of ruined reading for me a little bit. It took me a long time to get back into books after school. But I was doing a lot of public speaking work, and essentially a publisher came to one of my talks and was like, "Can you write like you speak?" And I was like, maybe. I could try. And then I got a book deal when I was really young. So I know that's not the story that most people have, and it's a very privileged, very lucky story. But now that I'm here, I'm like, this is an amazing space to be in. And I love the community of writers. But I will also say that if your goal in life is to only be a writer, you may struggle to pay the bills, especially in the Australian publishing industry, that it's often worth having something else on the go as well. So I also do training in workplaces around trans identity, and I'm also a marriage celebrant. So a lot of the writers I know do a million different things, which I think also helps your writing to be better as well.
I love that we have those completely different stories of breaking in, like headhunted. That is so exciting to me.
It was wild.
I kind of just slid into publishing, really, I wormed my way in. And I love the story of just being headhunted. That's so cool.
I mean, I love the worm story too. I love that.
All different ways. There's no
Anyone
one
can be a writer. Anyone can be a writer.
Exactly. And it doesn't really matter how much you've accomplished in writing, you'll probably still doubt that you're a writer. I feel like that is a true characteristic of a lot of writers, is like, I'm not enough of a writer, or like, I don't write often enough. Like every published author I've met has like a lot of imposter syndrome, except the ones who maybe could use some, It's the ones who are like, I am definitely an amazing writer, that are challenging people.
I always feel bad though for telling newer writers, no, you're always going to feel like this. You're always going to feel like, oh, is this good enough? And am I doing enough? But you sort of learn to live with that a bit better, I think.
It's all performative
or you
confidence.
just have lots of crises, but then you meet people who help you through them.
Yeah, I think it's just nice to know that you're not alone in it, and for as long as you just pretend you're really good at stuff, people will believe you.
Fake it till you make it,
Exactly.
Okay, so this one's getting back to the workshop. So what is your top tip to help teens get started?
Shall I go?
Yeah, you go for it, Emily.
Okay. Well, I think I'm probably most well known for character-led stories rather than very plotty stories. I always lead with character. So I always start with character, and the way I think about character is in 3 different parts. So I do try to think about what a character looks like, but that's often not that important to me or my writing. Number 2, I always think a lot about their backstory, all the detail of that, who their family is, their friends, their homes, their hobbies, their 1 or 2 past experiences. And even though I know I'm not going to use everything, I really try to know all of that as much as possible. And then finally, part 3 is like the heart of them, the core of them. And the way I think about that is, what do they fear most? What do they want most? And often those two things are actually going to give you your story. So that's how I try and think about character right at the start. And I often find that it really generates a lot of story just from those three things.
What a great tip. I wish I had written notes quickly enough. I want to do your workshops as well, especially as I move into a fiction space. That was such a hot tip. What's my hot tip? I think I have lots for very different topics. It kind of depends what you're working on. But I think, like confidence is a really big one, like working on validating yourself and your own voice. I do a lot of timed writing activities. So when I'm stuck and I just can't make myself write, I'll do 3 minutes and I'll just look at the closest thing near me and do 3-minute writing on sunglasses and just write, like no editing, no self-consciousness, like just get it out. And I find that once I kind of open the floodgates a little bit, it's a little bit easier to work on things. But for me, yeah, I'm not a very like disciplined writer. I don't sit down at 8 a.m. every morning and write for an hour, and I don't have a practice like that. I write very non-chronologically. So I'll come up with a scene that's, maybe 50 pages into a book, and I'll write that down, and then I'll go back and write another one. And I guess my main tip is like, it's whatever your process is great. Like you don't have to do it prescriptively based on how someone tells you to. Find what works for you and find what makes it flow and just follow that.
Yeah, I think it really changes. It can change book to book as well. That, the thing that really worked in your last book might not work for your next book. So remaining open to different processes is a really good idea.
Yeah, so true.
Yeah, because some things might not work for you. Some things might.
Yeah. I always have to have a different music for each novel.
Ooh.
So with one novel, I actually listened to The Sound of Rain for the whole 2 years that I wrote that novel. That's all I listened to.
That's all you listened to?
That doesn't sound very fun, though.
And it really, really helped me. It really worked. And then, so when I started writing the next book, I just was like, here's my Rain soundtrack. I'll start listening to it. And no, it was completely wrong because my head was back in the last book. So I have to find a different sound for every novel.
What was the sound of the next one?
The next one it's a kind of hip hop type of thing.
Cool. That is so cool. I love that.
It's just instrumental. But I have to have something that kind of almost puts me into like a mindful state. Like you were talking about free writing, where you've got to try and sort of turn off your inner critic. And sometimes you can do that with sounds or by turning your screen right down to dark so you can't even see what you're typing. All these little tricks that stop our inner critic from going, is that, yeah. So I find
love that. That's cool.
That's a good idea.
That's really cool.
Write with like invisible ink.
Yeah. Do it. You got to trick yourself because otherwise that inner critic comes along and tells you to stop.
So Emily, when you're writing a book, do you just like write the characters and then with no idea of the plot at all, you just write them and then go, what would be fun for them?
I definitely always start with characters and a scenario. So it's not just the character, it's also, I guess, what you would call an inciting incident, some kind of starting situation. But it doesn't have to be much to get me going. And then I get a few chapters in and then I start to think, better plot something really at this point. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's cool.
That's amazing. Oh, I love hearing about other people's processes. It's so fascinating.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it too. Yeah. It's good. And I'm sure the people in our workshop will have other things that they do that they can tell us about. I mean, always be open, always, especially, new writers, sometimes they have the best thing. Sometimes you get stuck in your old ways. Well, me, obviously, being the oldest person in this room. You need a young person to go, try this. This works.
I'm sure all the teens would appreciate your your suggestions though. We don't know what we're doing. Okay, I've got one last question, and then we'll open the floor up to some Q&A questions. And this one, if you could tell your younger writing self anything, what would you say?
Oh.
This is a not premeditated question, so you guys have to think about this one.
Yeah, I think I would just say, you know your story best. No one knows your story better than you do. There was like so much imposter syndrome for me writing my book, where I was like, what if I remember this wrong? And, you know, memory is not objective, right? You can't just like say this is exactly how it happened for sure, because everyone has a completely different experience of a situation. So I think I would just go back and remind myself that like it's okay if people disagree with you. That doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with that, because I didn't write my book for 4 months because I was afraid of how people would respond, how my family would respond. I was terrified, and now I'm like, if they want to write their own memoir, they can. You know, if they want to argue with what you had to say, they can do that. So yeah, I think I'd say that you're the author of your own story. Yeah.
When I was a teenager, I was writing very bad, very derivative poetry. I mean, appalling, just so bad. But it was sort of a thing I think I had to go through to kind of study everything that I loved, and then figure out how I could possibly how can I have a voice in this world when I love these voices so much? I definitely wasn't ready to write anything really big when I was young. And I think at some point I did think maybe time is running out, you know, when I was sort of near 20. Oh, you know, look at all these people who've already had a book published. Maybe I'm already a failure. But I just wasn't ready to write a novel by that age. I really wasn't. And I think I would just say, chill, it'll happen.
I love
Let
that.
it flow.
I'll take that advice.
Plenty of time.
Perfect. So now we'll let everyone ask their own questions. If you've got any questions for Emily or Nevo, just pop them in and answer them. It can be questions about the workshop, questions about the author, how their processes, or whatever you like.
Nothing maths. I can't do maths. Don't ask me anything about maths.
Same here. Anything but maths.
I
don't think that's not really the point.
Although I did try Nerdle. You know, everyone's playing. Is everyone playing Wordle?
I am now. I've been converted. Okay. Yes.
But then there's Nerdle, which is the maths version of Wordle.
Ew.
How does that work?
Well, you get so there's more squares, and it's a sum. But it could be like something plus something equals something, or something divided by something equals something. And you just keep putting all the numbers in, and it works exactly the same way as Wordle, where it'll be like, oh yeah, that number's in it, but that's in the wrong place. And you have to work out what the sum is.
No, thank you.
It's stressful for word people. I think
Wordle is already stressful for me. I'm convinced that I know no words. I have a question for you, Emily.
Like, you know, people are often like, oh great, I got it in 2, but I love getting it in 6, 5 or 6, because then you get the full experience of Wordle.
That's true. Emily, I have a question for you. When you are writing characters that are really different from you, that you almost have like nothing in common with, how do you even do that? Like, how do you get into the mind frame? How do you figure out their characteristics? Like, when you aren't actually writing from your own self, how do you connect with them and know what their voice sounds like even?
Well, it's a lot of experimental writing that will never end up in the novel. And I think that you have to, you know, I think sometimes when you're younger and writing and everything, you know, everything's for school or everything means something. So you think that every word has to be in it to count. But when you're writing a novel, especially when you are being a bit more experimental and you're not writing about your own experiences, you do just have to keep writing and keep thinking outside of yourself. And then, of course, when I am writing from a point of view where I really might get something wrong, then I will use a sensitivity reader. I've used a few for different novels, because I would never want to think, well, I would never want to hurt anybody with something I write. And that has been a way of going, wow, I'm either getting this completely wrong and I shouldn't do it, or this is how I can fix it. So a lot of research, a lot of experimentation, a lot of asking other people what they think, and yeah.
Cool. Kind of Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for the question.
Yeah, so we've got a couple questions. So the first one is, how is the workshop structured?
I'll talk about my workshops maybe. So my workshops are structured, like each one is a little bit different. Some have more writing activities than others. But I usually give some like tips and tricks on a certain topic, and we do a few like timed activities essentially.
So in mine, there will be some free writing, short bursts of it, for a particular reason. But there will be a lot of decision making that I will lead, but that you'll be making the decisions, but I will sort of lead the way. I guess I would think of it as I'm kind of like the Google Maps of your creative life, and I'm going to show you all the little bits along the way that you need. So each workshop will have 2 or 3 sort of different things that we're dealing with. So in the first one, we will do characters, themes, and the first line. And then the second one, we'll do setting and mood, and we'll talk about tropes as well, overused tropes, how to challenge tropes, how to make them work for you. And then, we're going to do dialogue and detail in the 3rd week, and then resolutions and endings in the 4th week.
I want to come.
That's amazing. I know.
That's so good.
So do you find that taking extended breaks between writing reduces your enthusiasm with writing? So, no, would you say write one chapter, leave it for 2 months, then write the next chapter, or does that?
Yeah, for me, I feel the opposite. I feel like forcing myself to write when I don't want to write, that's what reduces my enthusiasm of writing. I think I've gotten it really in my head from going to a lot of writers' festivals, or some people in literary communities are like, if you want to be good at writing, you should write every day, or like you should have this kind of discipline. And, maybe that's true for some people, but I think that's what's really played into my imposter syndrome, is like, I'm not like writers who feel like they must write all the time. I'm sort of like, yeah, I could write, I could not write, I could write in a year, I could write in 2. And I really liked what you said, Emily, of like, there's not this imperative to rush. Like, you can actually take your time. And I think that the book industry doesn't tell you that. They're like, oh, you haven't had a book out for 6 months, so what are you doing? But really for me, it's like, I don't want to write something just for the sake of it. Like, I don't need to just have my voice out because I want it to be there, because I have a good idea and something I'm excited about. So I really enjoy taking space between projects, or it should be fun. It's not homework, it's something that you enjoy doing. And for as long as it's fun, do it. And if it's not fun, take a break and find the magic in it again. Like, I think book writing especially is a long game. It's not a short game. And so you're bound to go in and out of excitement and not. And I think that's an okay thing to move with.
Okay. One question. How do you deal with writing block?
Do
you even believe in it? Does it exist?
Oh, I feel like I've been writing pretty nonstop for a few years, because I guess when you do get into the industry in a way that means you're writing to a contract, you've always got another contract to fulfill. It does become your job And so you can't necessarily say, I don't feel like it today, because you've got a deadline, you've got a contract. But I did find at the end of last year that I felt like everything I was writing just sounded really stale. And I think it's because I hadn't had a break from writing and I sort of really needed one. So I guess this is like the opposite of writer's block. I kind of blocked myself because I felt like I was just churning things out and I wasn't enjoying it and I wasn't really feeling it. So I just made myself stop and I just read instead. I can't remember writer's block, so I can't really answer that.
Yeah, that's totally unrelatable to me. I definitely have writer's block often. But I think like, yeah, I like that tip of like, if you're feeling blocked, read, you know, like you don't have to just find inspiration from within your own mind. You can find it elsewhere. You can read, you can watch movies, you can take up a new hobby. Like when I get excited about, I really like making tiny things and I'm really into mushrooms and fungi and like studying the forest. And when I get into that space, I'm like, maybe I want to write a character who does this. Maybe I want to explore what that looks like in children's books or something. Yeah. And I think also sometimes it's like, if you don't have a contract, it's okay to just be in writer's block. Maybe there's something that's happening for you. I think investigating that with curiosity, not just trying to push through, but actually saying like, what is it that's activated for me right now? Why don't I want to write? Like, is it because that's not my priority right now? Or do I have some like confidence stuff that I might need to work through? I think there's a reason why you're experiencing that. And I think it's worth investigating and unraveling a little bit. And then you might find it's easier to push through.
I think it's really interesting how like different you guys are. You've got really different like processes and stuff. Yeah, someone asked, would they be able to bring in something to continue working on if they have something already in the works?
Definitely. And even though I've described, you know, going from the beginning to the end, you can do that with something you've already started. It's just I will make you think about all the different things that you should be ticking as you go along. So if you've got something, fine, that's brilliant. But I'm still going to be saying to you, what is your theme? Do you know your theme? Because you need to know your theme by week 1. So yeah, absolutely bring something along that's something you've already worked on.
Yeah, same for me.
Perfect. Question, have you been on a literary pilgrimage? I'm not entirely sure what that's supposed to mean. Have you traveled to see an author's grave? I don't know. Is that what a literary pilgrimage is?
I don't really know what that means. Sorry.
Yes.
To be ignorant. Can you rephrase the
like,
question?
Yeah, like going somewhere for a book,
for
research. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
No, I haven't.
Oh yeah. I went to Sydney with my friend Nova Wheatman when we were writing a book together called Elsewhere Girls, which is a time slip body swap story that takes place in an ocean bath in Coogee in Sydney. And so we went to swim in the ocean bath just to be really full.
Why not?
That's great. And a tax deduction. Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Perfect. As a student whose creative writing is always done at school, how do you get over the feeling of, I have to sound smart in my writing and focus on your own voice?
I have to sound smart in my writing. I think I'm still getting over that, maybe.
Yeah, I still want to sound a bit smart.
But I think if you study the literature that you love, and often the most beautiful writers don't have 95 adjectives, 75 adverbs, and 7 different ways of expressing something. They just don't. That's just what they teach you in school so that you come away knowing exactly how to use language. But then you've got to give yourself permission to use it how you want to use it. You learn the rules and then you break them. And that's the purpose of grammar, to break the rules.
I love that. I think that is such a great hot tip for literally everything. Learn the rules and then break them. As an activist, I think that is a really great, understand the system before you try to break it. I think it's really good advice. Yeah, I think for me, I guess it depends, right? Like my fiction work and my poetry work is very different to my nonfiction stuff. My nonfiction stuff, I don't want to be smarter than my reader. I don't want to make them feel like they don't understand. I read stuff that's very like literary sometimes or academic, and I'm like, I have no idea what this is saying, and I feel stupid, and I feel like I could never write this well or something. And then I read some stuff that I'm like, oh my God, I feel so inspired by this. I understand all of it. It's challenged me, but I also just feel so good. And then it makes me want to write. And so that's the kind of writing that I want to do. And I think a lot of people who write for young adult or for children, that's what we're interested in, is like things that inspire rather than things that make you feel like you don't know enough. And because my nonfiction book is like educational about trans identity, I'm not trying to be like, I know everything about trans stuff. I'm like, hey, this can be a scary topic. Here are some easy ways to talk about it. Like, let's understand it together. So yeah, I think it's like when you're trying to get an A+, you want to seem as smart as possible. But when you're just trying to connect with other people and inspire and be excited and go on adventures, your priorities change. And I think once you get into that mode, it'll be really obvious. Like, just write how you speak. You know, you don't need to use all of those fancy words.
That's exactly right. You're trying to connect. You're not trying to get an A+. That's the best way you could put it. Love it.
Perfect. And the very last question, what are some common traps for younger authors and how to avoid them?
Common traps. Probably I would say like running off into the story and then finding yourself in the middle of it with absolutely no idea of where you are or how you got there. Even though I do think that's wonderful to experiment, if you are trying to get to the end of something, then you need to put a little bit more into the beginning planning. So if you have to submit a story for something, then, you know, I would say that's a trap you could fall into, just running off and not sort of thinking about where you're going. But just for your own writing, absolutely do run off and don't think about where you're going. But it's just when you're trying to, you know, create a whole piece, then you have to think about it a bit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. I think for me, there are a couple that I'm thinking of for myself, like things that I've really done. I know this comes up in a lot of writing spaces, but telling, not showing, you know, so saying like just kind of explaining a scene rather than painting a picture. I think that's really important, is like putting yourself into a scene and thinking about all of your senses, you know, like what would the air in this room smell like? What's the sound like? Are your feet on the floor or are they kind of flapping in the air? Like, do you have a headache? Like, how are you feeling? You know, like I think really investigating things from every angle allows the reader to put themselves in the story much better than if you were just like, and then I learned a lesson. Like, show us how you learnt the lesson.
Yeah.
And I think similarly, like I often find I'll write characters who know everything already, and I have to be like, wait, you don't know the ending. I know the ending. So how can I write a character at the beginning of their story arc and know where I want them to get? And I think that that's really hard. I think it's hard to write flawed characters who don't always do the right thing or what you would agree with. And I'm still learning how to do that better. But I think that that is a really easy thing to fall into, is like having characters who already know everything and don't grow or don't learn or don't get things wrong. Yeah.
It's all about the journey, not the ending.
Yeah.
So guys, that's the end of the questions. So thank you to the authors especially, and to everyone for coming to this information session. And the tickets for these guys' workshops have now opened, so please book and join us next week on Tuesday for a panel with Alicia Sometimes and Nova Wheatman, Emily's special friend. So join that information session too. So please, and thank you for coming today.
Thank you
so much, Catalina.